Hi there, I'm Danny Thompson. Welcome to my lair, a place full of twisted dreams and sweet nightmares. And don't let the bedbugs bite.
Thank you, Danny. Okay, welcome back to A View from the Bar. We are Sweet Nightmares. I'm Troy.
Hi, and I'm John.
And today we're talking about blood.
Well, yeah, as we're a horror kind of show, or try and be horror orientated at least, although we do tend to go off on tangents, it has to be said. One of the things that we were thinking of talking about is, and especially as I'm in the middle of doing a feature film where I'm about to do a load of blood effects, is the concept of, well, that we have nowadays, which is CG blood and also element blood, as opposed to shooting practical blood on set. So in the old days, before computers and all that sort of thing, obviously you would have practical blood effects, squibs, etc. On set. And one of the reasons why, and probably the main reason why, that nowadays you have a lot more kind of CG and element stuff, so less practical blood, is because obviously if you blow someone up and there's tons of blood everywhere, you then go, oh, well, let's do another take, and then you have to clean up all that blood and reset everything. So obviously that takes a huge amount of time, and especially on TV and independent low budget film, you probably don't have the money to do that. I know one of my recent jobs was working on a TV show which was kind of all soldiers and stuff, and half the budget was basically muzzle flashes and blood. And that's pretty much it. And all that was really, lowly bid, which we'll kind of come to in a bit anyway, in discussion about why maybe sometimes blood doesn't always look that great. So just a quick thing, just to kind of differentiate between the two kind of styles of blood that we find in visual effects nowadays in post-production. You have CG and element-based. Now, element-based, which is probably the one that can be the most successful, is basically you'll shoot an element. So you'll shoot blood squirting in front of a green screen and something like that, and then the visual effects artist will key that green out and produce blood, and then they'll put that onto the whatever's happening onto this shot. Now, certainly with shows, and especially, like I say, the TV one that I was working on, we shot a bunch of blood was shot for us, and you had about 20 different variations, and then you probably did, I don't know, 2,000 blood shots, and those 20 different variations were mixed together and used through. So probably if you did go through it, you could definitely see the same blood at certain points, and that's a big criticism with kind of the kind of VFXy blood stuff, is that especially sometimes you start to see the elements and start to see them, especially if you know already kind of the elements out there. You're like, oh, that's from that company, or that's from this, or whatever type thing. So yeah, elements tend to be shot on a green screen and then used. That tends to mean that they are better to start with, because they're real blood, and it's just a case of trying to comp them in and make them work within the shot. And obviously, if you've got the time and money and you've got something very specific, you can shoot a very definite element for that scene. And there's definitely a few times where we've had an element that's shot specifically for one thing, and then you kind of comp that in there and it's designed. And especially if it's something like, say, a head being hacked off or something like that, and you want a very specific way that the blood pours and goes, then your VFX supervisor on set would probably shoot something to help with that. So just jump into the second one, which is CG, the computer generated one. And this is normally generated using some kind of 3D program. There's quite a few out there that do the elements that you'll see all the time, and you can definitely see from a CG. It has that kind of, I suppose, plasticky generated look to it, and normally they're not very good. And even in big features, you can see them. Rambo, the remake, or the sequel, or whatever it is, the latest one that was done had loads of these kind of elements in there, and you can see instantly that it's CG. Having said that, it can sometimes work, especially if it's made for it. I know recently I worked on Angel Has Fallen, and spoiler alert, right at the end, the bad guy gets killed by the main guy.
I'm not going to bother watching it now, John.
I know. Yeah, I've ruined it now. So, yeah, and I know the blood element, that because I did the shot where he basically knifes him, and we had a blood element that was done in a program called Houdini, and it looked pretty realistic. It also was, it has to be said, really quick as well, which is probably what happens, in real life anyway. Sometimes with this kind of stuff, your blood lingers on screen for quite a long time. So CG blood, like stock CG blood, tends to be a bit of a problem, really easy to see. If you do something specific for a shot or for a film in say a program like a high-end program like Houdini, will do a really good job, but it will also struggle to probably make it look really realistic, and that's sometimes where your elements work. Obviously, with all these kind of stuff, though, there's the interaction of how the blood works on the set, etc., and all this kind of stuff. So that's stuff that you really, really have to think about. One other thing, just that I always quite like in blood, is blood mist as well. So there's the great scene, I know it's not horror, but Django, where basically Django's shooting lots of guys, and it's less
the original.
No, sorry, the Tarantino one,
Django Unchained,
having lots of blood. We could probably talk for ages about blood in Tarantino movies anyway.
Yeah.
So
and there's a lot of blood in Tarantino.
Kill Bill, exactly, yeah. So but what if you look at that scene, what you see less is kind of the blood hits or that, but more like this mist of blood. And I always feel that's quite nice. Kind of sits within the lighting as well, and it gets really sort of pops out and kind of makes a bit more sense. So those are the kind of basic things that we see nowadays. We'll have a chat about kind of what Troy thinks from his perspective. One thing I was going to say that's quite interesting is obviously you can go through the whole history of blood and see, especially realism. And what I've just talked about really is making something realistic. There is other sides to it as well. For instance, like Dario Argento, and his blood was always kind of almost pink in its color. The level of blood, I mean, I couldn't imagine trying to do something like Brain Dead with the amount of blood that's going on in that in a computer. Would be a complete nightmare and virtually impossible, probably, or at least it would take a long time and probably cost a lot of money. So Troy, what's your opinion on kind of blood? Do you see it? Do you find it distracts from kind of the film if you suddenly get with this? Do you enjoy the practical side or the?
Yeah, I mean, I generally mostly prefer practical effects to VFX. For the most part, it depends on what's being depicted. I think the first time I ever saw CGI blood, or certainly the first time I was made aware of it, was Beat Takeshi's Zatoichi, if that's the correct pronunciation. I've probably completely butchered that, so apologies to anyone who's from Japan.
I think that was kind of right. So.
Okay. Um, yeah, over here in the UK, we normally pronounce it Zatoichi, which is probably even worse. But yeah, so I think that was the first time I'd seen it, and I was aware of that it's almost like it's superimposed onto the figures. It's almost like it's not there, like it's a different layer. So it did look quite obvious that the blood wasn't real. And it was probably early days for it as well. But then after that, I became a lot more aware of it, and I was seeing it in a lot more films. I remember Takeshi Miike's what's the film about the kid that kicks people really hard? Ichi the Killer.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so that whole scene where he beats the crap out of the room full of gangsters and their faces are sticking to the wall and what have you. There's lots of CGI blood in that. So I've just kind of grown to accept it, but I do kind of miss when I see it now. If it's obvious, I do miss like a good old fashioned blood pack, or the Akira Kurosawa style blood gusher that Tarantino used in Kill Bill. But do they not use blood packs anymore? And is that, if not, is it because of what happened with Brandon Lee on The Crow?
I wouldn't have thought that would have had much sway on things. I felt that was possibly a bit of a one-off. And, guns and such are so strict on set. I do think it was, like I said before, it's a finance thing. It's a money thing that you can get more takes on a set without splattering blood everywhere and then having to clean it off, type thing. David Fincher's like one of the ones who's regarded as a person who shoots huge amounts of takes, and he always uses computer generated blood. So if you look at the scene in, say, Zodiac at the start where the couple are shot in the car, that's all CG blood. Now, I would say he's a perfectionist. They probably got a lot of money and they got a lot of time, so it looks like blood. You wouldn't notice. You unless somebody tells you, you wouldn't even notice. And that's, to me, is the difference, really. That's he's got time, money, and he is going to get it right. Whereas maybe in something like not picking holes in it, or like a TV show or something like Rambo or something like that, where maybe there's possibly not quite as much money and there's probably huge amounts of blood shots. They would maybe pick the shots that don't need to be completely bonkers or difficult to do in a computer, and would just like when he's shooting and 10 people fall down, it's much cheaper and easier to just add the kind of blood in post there and then. So but definitely when you get into your very sort of stylized blood like Tarantino, like one of my favorite silly horror films, fair to say, is a thing called Vampire Girl versus Frankenstein Girl, which I think is really, it's hilarious and also just totally bonkers, which I kind of like as a total bonkers Japanese film. There's bits in that, and it reminds me of Salad Days and Monty Python, basically. Monty Python Salad Days, where basically they threw the tennis racket at someone and they fail to catch it. It hits them in the head and there's just blood like that, and it's actually quite funny. So for those stylized things, you probably you normally would, especially if you're doing that amount of gore, you would normally do it on set, practical. You probably in your shot schedule basically allow a certain amount of time for someone to come in with a mop and get rid of all the blood if you were going to do a few takes. Or you were like with explosions, it's possibly a 1-take deal, 1-2-take deal. It all depends. It's with this kind of stuff. It costs a fortune to pay a crew to stand there while someone mops up the floor. So that to me is the main reason why. Also because it can look good. It can work, but it's very difficult. And if you say to an artist, you've got 20 minutes to do this shot, it's going to look rushed and it's not going to look good and it's not going to be quite right. So
yeah, like I say, I'm sure like with the Zatoichi stuff, it's because it was quite early days for it. That was sort of mid 90s, was it? I think
it must have been something like that.
Yeah,
Time flies.
so probably quite early days for it. And a lot of the time when you're aware that you're seeing CGI blood is because it's it's cheap budget, like you say, it's TV stuff, or it's something like Sharknado or whatever, one of those kind of films. So it's probably a budgeting thing as much as anything. But like the over the top blood gusher, the samurai or Kill Bill type blood gusher, could that work with CGI?
Yeah, in principle, you could probably say anything can work. It just needs amount of time, and time really, if you want to think of it, equals money. And finding the right solution that works. It has to be said sometimes, like that you can do so. There's normally about 3 or 4 different ways of doing something, and it's finding the one that kind of works for the most. Could be also the way it's shot. How what it you're kind of dealing with. There's always in VFX, you kind of have a little look at the shot that you're about to work on and think, oh, that'll be this, that, and the other. And then as soon as you get in there, there's something that throws a spanner in the works. So there'll always be that kind of stuff. But for the want of doing it, the best way for something like that, if you was like, we can't do it on set. So say, for instance, there's a very logistical reason why you couldn't do it, i.e. you're doing it in the middle of the street outside an army barracks, and you probably don't want, huge amounts of blood spurting everywhere and stuff, because the army would come out and shoot you probably. So say you was in that situation or whatever, you could then look at the element side of it and shoot an element in front of a green screen, and then try and comp that in, and then you get the sense of the movement, the proper movement, the spray, etc., like that, and then it will just be up to the comp artist to try and comp that in as best they can. And if you shoot it well, then that becomes a much easier thing. If the angle's all wrong or the camera's in the wrong place, and when you shoot your element and it looks completely different, so say the shot is looking up at someone, and then you shoot the element looking down at the element, it's all going to be all the wrong angle and stuff like that, and etc. So there's lots of things to consider in this kind of stuff. Again, that's why CG is possibly easier to do, because it's all you're building it from scratch in a computer, so your camera can be anywhere and do anything. You'll always have that kind of side of it. So within that CG side, there's that element of, I guess the problem with elements, they are 2-dimensional, so they can break quite easy as soon as you start moving around them or trying to warp them into something. With CG, it tends to be 3-dimensional, 3D, and so you have it's a lot easier to create the element that you actually want. But then it's probably a bit more difficult to get it to look 100% correct. So.
And so what in your experience, is there like a type of, is there a specific program or a type of CG blood that you favor?
My personal thing would be elements are always good. There's a really cool, there's quite a few websites out there. There's a really cool one that I like to use, called Action VFX. They're not paying us any money, but they are well worth checking out. And all their advantages with their elements, like when you're shooting the elements, is that they're normally shot at high resolution, normally 6K. They're shot in red, so you have a huge amount of dynamic range to your light and the image. It's good quality image, and they'll fill. They have the whole frame of it. There's always these terrible elements where it's kind of really close to it, and the element goes off the screen, and it's just like, well, it's brilliant. The element looks brilliant on screen, but that doesn't fit in my shot because all of a sudden the blood's disappearing. So they're a good one to check out if you're looking for blood, and I definitely recommend those. If you wanted to try and do it CG wise, then you have to really kind of look at your high end stuff, your Houdini program, Maya, Modo. It's a whole particle thing, and it's quite complicated. And there are people who do it, for a living, and they do it very well. But definitely, if you're an independent sort of low budget film and you want that kind of thing, then think about elements first, I would, and plan this kind of stuff, because like I say, it can really throw off the look of a film if you've suddenly, especially with that kind of thing, and especially if it's a horror film, then people kind of want to see the blood, and then when they look at it, it's just like, oh, well, actually that looks a bit rubbish, then that's a problem. So
cool. Okay,
cool.
So is there anything else you want to say about
no, I think that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about. So
I mean, hopefully viewers have learned something about that, and especially people like yourself that are in the effects industry. So if you've got any comments or questions, put them in the box below, and we'll be back soon. I think I'm not sure the order that we film these in, but I think next week is our Halloween special.
Yeah, I do believe so.
So don't make sure you tune in for that and listen to us waffling on about John Carpenter's Halloween, among other things. And we've been Sweet Nightmares. This has been A View from the Bar. Be good to yourselves.
Take care.